Before power was measured in market share, it was measured in territory. Let's review the ultimate strategists. The question is how authority changes when leaders know more than those they command, and what happens when that advantage shrinks. Information asymmetry exists whenever one level controls access to reports, interpretation, timing, or distribution. That advantage can shape decisions even without deliberate deception. Access and interpretation are both sources of leverage. In slow communication environments, scarcity itself creates hierarchy. Those nearest the center receive more signals, compare more reports, and decide which information travels outward. Scarcity shapes hierarchy before any deliberate policy appears. Authority can then appear larger because alternatives remain unseen. Subordinates may accept central judgment, partly because they cannot observe the same evidence or competing interpretations. Unseen alternatives can make one interpretation seem difficult to question. Now, this does not mean historical authority rested mainly on secrecy. Information advantage interacted with resources, institutions, coercion, legitimacy, and practical coordination. Information remains one mechanism among several. This episode examines information advantage as one foundation of power, then asks how authority must adapt when access becomes faster, wider, and harder to control. The transition changes the foundation rather than ending authority. The first mechanism is selective visibility. Leaders and intermediaries may see patterns across regions, while local actors see only their immediate conditions. Broad vision can support coordination and domination alike. That wider view can support coordination, but it also creates dependence. Local actors must trust decisions whose underlying information they cannot independently evaluate. Dependence grows when verification remains outside local reach. The second mechanism is control over timing. Information delivered early can shape preparation, while delayed information can leave others responding after choices have narrowed. Timing changes both options and perceived urgency. The distinction matters, because controlling when information arrives can be as influential as controlling which information arrives. Delay can quietly reshape the decision field. The third mechanism is framing. The same event can be presented as threat, success, disorder, sacrifice, or necessity, changing how audiences interpret the required response. Framing influences which consequences appear most important. Framing does not require fabrication. Selection, emphasis, sequence, and omission can alter meaning while each individual statement remains technically compatible with the event. Meaning can shift through arrangement rather than invention. The fourth mechanism is channel access. Whoever controls the routes connecting center and periphery can prioritize some reports, filter others, and determine which voices reach authority. Channels, therefore, determine whose reality becomes institutionally visible. The fifth mechanism is verification cost. When independent confirmation is slow or difficult, official interpretation gains practical weight even among skeptical audiences. High verification cost protects weak interpretations from challenge. Within that context, information advantage becomes authority when unequal access consistently places one actor in the position of defining what is happening. Definition becomes power when alternatives remain inaccessible. The sixth mechanism is institutional memory. Central archives, experienced offices, and accumulated reports can make the center appear uniquely capable of understanding long patterns. Memory can support learning or monopolize interpretation. The seventh mechanism is classification. Institutions divide information into urgent, routine, credible, doubtful, local, and system-wide categories, shaping what receives attention. Classification directs attention before judgment formally begins. The eighth mechanism is narrative continuity. Repeated interpretations connect separate events into one account of order, danger, competence, or rightful command. Continuity can organize events while excluding competing accounts. Authority moves through institutions. Information rarely travels directly from reality to a leader. It passes through observers, messengers, offices, filters, and incentives. Each transfer introduces both knowledge and incentive. Each intermediary can add context, remove uncertainty, distort emphasis, or protect personal interests. The information system is therefore also a power system. Power enters the system long before final decisions. The first vulnerability is upward distortion. Subordinates may hide failure, exaggerate success, or simplify ambiguity when they believe the center rewards reassurance. Reassurance becomes rational when honesty appears personally costly. The second vulnerability is central overconfidence. Access to many reports can create an impression of complete knowledge even when many reports shares the same blind spot. Quantity of reports does not guarantee diversity of perspective. The third vulnerability is local exclusion. A center may possess broad information yet miss tacit conditions understood only by those closest to the decision. Broad reach cannot replace local understanding. The fourth vulnerability is delayed correction. When the official interpretation becomes tied to authority, contradictory information may be treated as disloyal rather than useful. Protected interpretations become increasingly difficult to revise. Study the architecture of command. Information advantage strengthens authority only while the system can convert unequal access into better judgment rather than protected error. Authority must remain corrigible to remain credible. The fifth vulnerability is channel capture. A small group controlling access to the center can shape priorities and present its own interests as institutional reality. Access control can quietly become policy control. The sixth vulnerability is narrative rigidity. A framework that once organized uncertainty may become unable to absorb new information without threatening its legitimacy. Rigid narratives treat correction as institutional danger. The seventh vulnerability is dependence on scarcity. If authority is justified mainly by exclusive access, broader distribution of information can weaken its foundation quickly. Scarcity-based legitimacy weakens as comparison becomes possible. The eighth vulnerability is verification competition. Once multiple channels offer competing accounts, authority must explain why its interpretation deserves trust. Trust must then be earned through process and judgment. The ninth vulnerability is speed mismatch. Faster circulation can expose inconsistency before institutions have time to investigate, coordinate, and respond. Speed can outrun verification and institutional response. The 10th vulnerability is attention overload. Wider access does not eliminate asymmetry. It can shift power toward those who filter abundance and define relevance. Filtering becomes the new strategic bottleneck. Information scarcity and information abundance therefore create different authority problems. One concentrates access, the other concentrates interpretation and attention. Abundance relocates asymmetry rather than eliminating it. The adaptation begins with transparency about uncertainty. Authority becomes more credible when it distinguishes known facts, interpretation, unresolved questions, and changing judgments. Clear uncertainty protects credibility during revision. The second adaptation is distributed verification. Local institutions and independent channels can test claims rather than relying on one center to confirm itself. Verification distributes authority over what counts as credible. The third adaptation is explanation. When audiences can compare information, authority must show reasoning, priorities, and trade-offs instead of relying on exclusive access. Explanation converts command into accountable reasoning. A counterpoint is that complete openness is neither possible nor desirable in some circumstances. Privacy, security, negotiation, and incomplete evidence can require temporary limits. Limits need purpose, scope, and review. The boundary is whether restriction serves a defined institutional purpose or merely protects authority from scrutiny and correction. Purpose distinguishes protection from insulation over time. Another limitation is that wider access does not automatically produce shared understanding. More information can increase confusion, conflict, and manipulation. Abundance can create new forms of dependency. Within that context, trusted institutions remain necessary. The issue is not replacing authority with unrestricted circulation, but grounding authority in accountable interpretation. Trust should rest on accountable methods rather than monopoly. A conceptual case shows the old pattern. Imagine a center receiving reports from many locations while local units cannot compare information beyond their immediate area. The center's advantage is real but incomplete. The center gains coordination power because it can see relationships others cannot, yet its interpretation remains difficult to challenge from below. Coordination and vulnerability grow from the same asymmetry. The new pattern appears when local units can compare reports rapidly, identify contradictions, and circulate alternative explanations beyond the center's channels. Comparison weakens the center's exclusive interpretive position. Authority does not disappear, but its basis changes. Exclusive access becomes less persuasive, while accuracy, judgment, accountability, and coordination become more important. Judgment replaces scarcity as the central claim to authority. The opening question can now be answered. Information advantage became authority when unequal access allowed leaders and institutions to define reality for others. Definition of reality is an institutional act. As access broadens, authority that depends mainly on scarcity becomes vulnerable. It must either restrict circulation more aggressively or develop a different foundation. Restriction becomes increasingly costly as channels multiply. A durable alternative is interpretive legitimacy, the ability to explain uncertainty, integrate competing information, correct errors, and coordinate action credibly. Credibility depends on correction as much as initial accuracy. That foundation is more demanding than control. It requires institutions to tolerate contradiction and revise public judgments without treating revision as humiliation. Revision must be possible without institutional humiliation. The system matters more than the myth. Authority cannot rely for long on appearing uniquely informed when others can observe, compare, and challenge its account. Comparison exposes claims that exclusive access once protected. This also explains why information control can produce short-term coherence while weakening long-term judgment. Protected narratives reduce the feedback needed for correction. Coherence without feedback can become disciplined error. A resilient authority system separates confidentiality from concealment, uncertainty from incompetence, disagreement from disloyalty, and correction from collapse. These distinctions protect both necessary authority and correction. So the practical question is not simply who has the information, it is who can verify it, interpret it, challenge it, and act on it responsibly. This question maps information into institutional responsibility. Begin by mapping where information enters the institution, who filters it, which incentives shape reporting, and which voices cannot reach the decision. Filtering decisions reveal where practical power resides. Then examine timing. Ask who learns first, who learns late, and whether delay reflects necessity, capacity limits, or the protection of advantage. Timing analysis exposes hidden advantage and vulnerability. Inspect framing by comparing what is emphasized, omitted, repeated, and connected. Interpretation becomes power when audiences cannot examine alternative frames. Frames can be contested only when alternatives are visible. Ask how the system handles contradiction. If correction threatens status, information will bend toward reassurance rather than accuracy. Correction design determines whether truth can travel upward. The final application must remain bounded. Historical information environments and modern networks differ profoundly in speed, scale, institutions, and rights. Analogy requires restraint across radically different environments. Still, one leadership question remains useful. Is authority trusted because it controls access, or because it demonstrates disciplined interpretation and accountable correction? Trust must survive broader access and stronger challenge. Effectiveness is not legitimacy. Accurate coordination can coexist with unjust secrecy, while transparency can be performative rather than genuinely accountable. Secrecy and transparency each require moral evaluation. Use this lens to examine visibility, timing, framing, channels, verification, memory, attention, correction, and the ethical boundaries of confidentiality. Together, these elements reveal information as organized power. The durable lesson is a question. When information advantage fades, does authority become more accountable, or merely search for a new way to remain unchallengeable? The throne changes, the strategy remains. Until next time.